Today, I publish a book named after the road of suffering, Via Dolorosa. I worked on this book for about 8 years, and it was a hard book to write because I was so confused about the end. I was never satisfied with the ending, and it took me a while to understand the point of this book, of this work, because I tried to ask myself a question. What exactly I want to say in this book? What's the point to write this book in the first place? Because the entire book dedicated to unending suffering that my characters go through. And it seems like there's no redemption, and with no redemption, there's no point. And if there's only darkness with no light, what's the point to celebrate this darkness? Because it reminds me our civilization right now, because people celebrate darkness too much. We celebrate it and we forget about the light. It seems like nobody believes in light any longer. It seems like only darkness around us, and we keep celebrating this darkness again and again. And we go to ridiculous ideas while celebrating this darkness. We keep justifying crimes committed by other people against other people. We keep praising criminals, and we keep condemning victims like it's their fault. And that's what happens when darkness becomes thick and nobody able to see the light. Because light must be within us, while darkness is something around us. And if you don't have light within yourself, then the darkness around you becomes your identity. And you identify yourself with this darkness. And once you identify yourself with this darkness, you become dark. You become darkness itself. And there's nothing within you and without you. And you see nothing. There's no morality. There's one tragedy upon another. And you blame the rest of the world. You blame the darkness itself as the result, without accepting that you're the one who led this darkness to consume you, to rule your world, and to become your world. Yes, it took me 8 years to understand what I was writing about. And in this book, interesting thing happening, because in some sense, I discovering God on the pages of that book. It's actually my struggle with the idea of God, because I put my characters through hell, and suddenly I realize if there's a hell, then there's supposed to be heaven, because why would we have hell without heaven? Why would we have devil without God? And this discovery gives me hopes for redemption of some of my characters. Not all of them, but some, and I feel really bad that I couldn't save some of my characters in that book, because I really wanted to save them. Some of them didn't deserve what happened to them, but I couldn't do nothing because there was circumstances I had no control of. And when you write a book, you trust your characters to make decisions whether they're right or wrong, because if you start interfering too much with your characters, the book becomes generic and uninteresting. I need them to redeem themselves by themselves through their actions, through their bravery. And I cannot help them with that. I can only give them past. I can only create characters themselves, and then they have to make a decision based on their past and based on their character. Like in real life, because all my decision depends on me, depends what I carry within myself, depends on my character, and depends on my past, because in some sense my past defines my future. That's why we have to constantly fight to change our present, because our present constantly becomes our past. And if you don't change your present, you can see your future through your past, since nothing changed at all. And that's what this book is all about. It's about sorrow, the road, the cross that we have to carry upon our shoulders, the heavy cross that we have to carry. And you cannot throw it on the ground, because it's not the point. It's impossible. It's just part of you. And I was thinking about our civilization and how we celebrate the wrong idea of life by any means necessary. Our life becomes so animalistic, so comfortable in the animal-like sense because we're obsessed with comfort. We're obsessed with the wrong kind of wealth. We want expensive cars, expensive houses. We want everything like everybody else have. But what exactly do you really want? What exactly defines you as a human being? What's the point of your particular life? That's what the question I tried to figure out in this book through my characters, because all of my characters in that book had their own Via Dolorosa, and they tried to figure out their path, and their path reflected their decisions, because it's like a circle. You have to understand yourself to be able to understand life. And can you find meaning in your life when you reject suffering? And I'm not saying that you have to look for suffering, but suffering is it's a big part of our life, whether you like it or not. And the way you deal with this suffering define you as a person, define you and your life. Because if you deal with suffering properly, you become deeper, you become more aware of yourself and the world. And if you reject suffering, then you have to numb yourself with drugs, alcohol, and many other addictions to become less aware of yourself and the world, since the world provides you with suffering, and you're the one who rejects the suffering. And in some sense, by rejecting this suffering, you reject yourself. You learn less about yourself, because in some sense, you learn about yourself through the world that provides you with the suffering. And that's how you truly understand who you are and what are you capable of. And that's what my characters, even good ones that I really like, use drugs because they just cannot help it. They put themselves in hell voluntarily, and they use drugs to numb themselves. And the problem with this, it's life can create huge tragedies out of your life. But the problem is, you have to accept those tragedies. You have to find some meaning in those tragedies. And then you have to try to save yourself and people you love from these tragedies. Or go with your people you love through those tragedies. But the problem with us, and with my characters in my book, we can make it even worse with resentfulness, with our own decision, with constant blame upon each other. That's why I have married couple who keep blaming each other for the suffering they keep causing with this blame to each other. Because it's really easy to make your life from bad to worse, and then much more worse, and much more worse, and much more worse. There's no limit. The hell is bottomless, and you can spiral down the hell again and again and again and again, and going through internal suffering of your own being. And that's why faith in God, faith in goodness can save you. And that's why when you accept that your life somehow became tragedy, you don't want to make it worse. You just want to accept, okay, something bad happened to my life. What should I do to accept it? What should I do not to become resentful? And what should I do to help people around me to overcome this suffering, to soothe their suffering? That's the point of life, because you cannot find meaning in life if you reject suffering, because that's the only way to reflect upon yourself and upon your life. It's the only way to understand who you really are. And that's what Via Dolorosa is, the way of sorrow, whether you like it or not. And that's what the problem with the modern idea of comfort. I was thinking about death and how we hide death in the West like something to be embarrassed by. Think about it for a moment. We don't see funerals any longer. death doesn't happen to no one. Everybody dies in a hospital and hidden in morgue and then in a funeral house and then buried very quickly. Like death doesn't happen. And even when person dies, people make them as they sleep, as they still alive. I remember when I was a kid, when my father died, he was lying in an apartment for a couple of days in a coffin. And you sit and watch him. Because you have to acknowledge death. You have to understand death. You have to be able to digest death. Why? Because it's the only way to appreciate life, through understanding and acknowledging the suffering of death. The suffering when you lose somebody you really love, who was a part of your life. Because if you delegate death of someone in your family to strangers who just masquerade this death for the sleeping living and then hide in a funeral house, and then you go, you say goodbye and they bury, you seems like become detached from this death, and there's no more grieving. Everything becomes illusionary, like nothing happens. And how are you supposed to appreciate life if there's no death? And that's, I think, the biggest problem. That's why in my book there's such a death happens, and how one of my heroes deal with this death. It's much different, much more unusual, because sometimes you have to take matter in your own hands. And of course there's a story of revenge, but it's not revenge like in the movies where it feels so good, because revenge kills you. The stuff about revenge is, are you willing to sacrifice yourself to revenge for someone you love? And that's another problem we have with comfort. We justify too often crimes committed against other people. And then if something happened to us, we're afraid to protect ourselves. We become so comfortable with life that we're terrified to deal with true evil. And the way we deal with the true evil, we reject true evil. Like we reject suffering, like we reject death. We just reject all those bad things around us, just to keep this illusionary comfort and hoping that nothing bad would happen to us. And if something would, we would close our eyes and ignore it. And that's my book in some sense is all about. Because you have to follow your road of sorrow, whether you like it or not. You have to. This is our life. And that's the point, to find meaning. Otherwise, there's no meaning. Otherwise, there's nothing. Because we need to understand that meaning is in suffering. And life provides you with suffering if you're brave enough to face life truly. If you're brave enough to try to accomplish something really meaningful with your life. Because if you want to hide from life, then you won't get no suffering, but at the same time, you would never discover meaning. But if you face life, if you try to achieve something, then suffering will come your way, and you have to face it, and you have to struggle through it. And often you have to do it alone. And that's the point. Because life appreciates warriors. Life appreciates the ones who's not afraid to face it, who's not afraid to accept it, and keep fighting no matter what until death do you apart. That's, I think, the point. This constant comfort that we keep celebrating makes mad people out of us. We support women who killed their own kids. We have empathy for criminals who keep abusing citizens. We turn everything upside down and then backwards. Why? Because we're terrified of true evilness. I think it seems like we believe that if we normalize evil, then evil become normal. We shouldn't be afraid of evilness. But evil is not normal. Corruption is not normal. And there's no way to find meaning of your life in your own cowardliness. And it doesn't matter that you try to masquerade your cowardliness behind being nice, behind being civil, because civility is only possible when you have strength, and you can only be nice and kind if you can be incredibly brutal and cruel when you have to be. Because a rabbit cannot be kind. A rabbit has no teeth. But if you really have teeth, if you really can bite like a wolf or like a lion and chose not to, that's where you real. That's where you alive. And that's where you will handle your own Via Dolorosa, the road of sorrow, and go through this life facing it, finding your own meaning, and accomplishing something that will outlive you when you die.